Good afternoon. I'm Frank Kaufmann. I'm the president of the Professor's World Peace Academy. It is my great honor this afternoon to welcome to the program of our Scholars Interview Series, Professor John Stratton Hawley, or Jack Hawley. Professor Hawley is the Clare Tao Professor of Religion at Barnard University, his professional home since 1986. Professor Hawley's research is focused on the religious life and literature of North India, particularly that of the last 500 years. Jack Hawley has served as director of Columbia University's South Asia Institute and has received multiple awards from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Smithsonian, and the American Institute of Asian Studies. He has also been a Guggenheim Fellow and was recently elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. In 2016 to 17, he was a Fulbright Nehru Fellow and principally resident in Vrindavan, India, which is not far from New Delhi. Professor Hawley is the author and editor of more than 25 books, most of them treating concerns related to Hinduism and the religions of India. Recent publications include A Storm of Songs, India and the Idea of the Bhakti Movement, and together with Kenneth E. Bryan, Sur's Ocean, Poems from the Early Tradition. Both of these were published by the Harvard University Press. Both won an award from the Association for Asian Studies. Dr. Hawley's most recent publication is Krishna's Playground, Vrindavan in the 21st Century. This was published with Oxford University Press just this year, 2020. Please join me to welcome to the program Professor Jack Hawley. Professor, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. It's really our good luck to have you with us.
I'm glad to be here. We have a little secret that it took a few times for us to be able to have worked.
Right. I think perhaps we started on Friday the 13th. That may have been the beginning of troubles, but we're here now, and this is a great
now it's full force Diwali. We're okay.
Right. That's correct. Yeah, Diwali. That's perfect. We should have a colorful time together.
Nice.
So the brief background about our encounter, this is new for a new relationship. We've not been working together in different times of our history. And we both have a common friend in Acharya Srivatsa Goswami, who is in Vrindavan and head of, what is the name of his ashram?
Called the Sri Chaitanya Prem Sansthan, or as it would be called locally, either Gambhira is the technical name, or Jaisinghya.
Gambhira, right.
You get your choice.
So Srivatsaji is the heir of an original family of the area and quite a beautiful embodiment of the spirituality and potential of the tradition and the locale. And both of us, for different reasons, have the blessing of having Srivatsa as an acquaintance. I interviewed Srivatsa on his recent work. It's not that recent, honestly, but he's become quite the environmental activist for the protection of the, is it Jumna River? Is that the correct name?
It's pronounced two ways, Jamna, if you're speaking Hindi in that way,
yes,
a little more formally. So it's the Ja is the vernacularization of the Sanskrit Ya. So
very good. Jamna is the best. That's good, huh?
Pretty close, Jamuna.
Jamuna. So Vrindavan sits on the Jamuna River. The river has suffered environmental assault due to the various forces of modernity. And Srivatsa, who's responsible for the town in ways, at least to the extent that his family has served as a spiritual center there, is naturally invested in care for the river. So I was interviewing Srivatsa on this matter, and I wanted to know where some of the, although he's an old friend, I asked him, what can I read? How can I prepare to interview you? And Srivatsa referred me to your book, Professor Hawley, Krishna. Uh, uh, the name of the book, please, again, please.
It's called Krishna's Playground, Vrindavan in the 21st century.
Yes, thank you. Krishna's Playground, Vrindavan in the 21st century. And there's a chapter on Srivatsa there. And so
That's right.
he referred me to that chapter as the basis for which I could prepare for my interview with him. As I was reading it, I was just enchanted and kind of transported by the beauty and kind of lilting elegance of your account of Srivatsa, an old friend of mine, to such an extent that I felt like I didn't even know my own friend. And so in the middle of that, it was so insightful and such fine writing.
Thank you.
So thank you. And so I asked Srivatsa, I said, who is this person who can make me feel a stranger to my own friend with such, as I said, such insight and such a delicate presentation of something I thought I knew, including Vrindavan, where I've also, like you, spent a lot of time. So for my listeners, this is how Professor Hawley and I are together today. And it's a very sweet encounter, despite our technical troubles. And so
it's a bittersweet encounter.
Bittersweet, because once you prevail, then you feel all the better for it. And so I want to do my best. To be a supportive interviewer and try to gain from you, Professor, just things that conversation brings out. I know you spend a tremendous amount of time writing. You have a number of award-winning books, over 25 books, as already mentioned in your introduction. So, but sometimes conversation is, things come out that are special or memorable. And so I'm hoping that this can happen with us today too. So
we have a couple of special categories for that in the Indian sort of way of thinking of things. One is a vernacular term, goshti, which means kind of sitting down together and talking. And the other is the old formulaic Sanskrit expression samvad, which is really debate, but debate in a friendly way. In any case, here we are together. Or
yeah, excellent. And so the first one, the Hindi again is, or Sanskrit again is?
Oh, this is the Hindi word would be goshti or satsang. In any case.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Indian categories. Sitting together.
Sitting together.
Is that within your vocabulary?
No, it's not.
No. I thought you had some Jewish stuff in you somewhere. What is this? Come on. And it's the Sabbath.
You'll have to
There you are.
And the translation, please.
Oh, what a blessed thing it is for people to sit together.
Beautiful. Yeah. When I was interviewing Srivatsa and I was talking about, we ended up talking about scripture, and he corrected me. He said, it's not scripture which is connected to writing, but the Hindu tradition is oral more. And there's a term for the sacred word that is more spoken than written.
He was referring probably to the Sanskrit word sutti.
Exactly, yes.
And there was actually in Vedic times, a long time ago, there was a prohibition against writing out of the fear that it would be inaccurate. So children,
isn't that great? Isn't that great? And then the Western matter goes the opposite way, that they suspect the oral as the danger of inaccuracy.
I think both have their point. actually.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Well, yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. So what I did was I tried to prepare, and there are two most recent things that I caught, I think from you, or I hope I guessed right. And one is that you've created a course uh, that you're currently teaching at Barnard on spirituality and environmental concern. I forget the exact name of how it appears in the catalog.
It's called Religion and Climate Crisis. So spirituality is not in the title. Religion,
Okay.
Climate Crisis, and it's over with. By as a matter of fact,
Mm,
because of COVID, Barnard and Columbia made the decision to institute a new kind of teaching for this term, which was intensive teaching.
yes.
It's not that all courses are that way, but some are. The guess was that on the basis of computer fatigue or Zoom fatigue,
Yeah.
it might really be well to try to restructure the curriculum. So that's what we did.
And so the course was taught in a condensed period of time as an intensive.
It sure was. We met every day,
Mm-hmm.
sort of like boot camp.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it happened.
And how long was it condensed to?
7 weeks.
I see. Okay, so it's still a good long time together. Religion and the climate crisis.
And there was a colon after it, namely India. So the idea there was to try to introduce students, both students who have some Indian background of their own, who have been to India, and students who have no acquaintance with India at all, to a place in the world where the effects of climate change are being felt in a more dramatic way than they are in the United States.
Okay.
Delhi,
Okay.
just up the river from Vrindavan, that same river, the Yamuna,
Yeah.
is typically the most polluted city in the world in terms of air quality. And
Mm.
as she flows through Delhi, is as polluted a river as you can find anywhere on the face of the globe. So actually the stretch of the Yamuna that's between Delhi and Vrindavan, which is downstream by about 100 miles, it's really a dead river. There's
Oh,
the oxygenation of the river is so minimal that it's just dead, and the poison's there and so forth. This is the sacred Yamuna River, who is acted as and beloved as herself a goddess. So she represents that vivid encounter with the larger environment in which we human beings take our place. That is a fundamental part of Hindu religiosity. So how is it possible that Hindus have allowed this to happen in their own country?
I see. Forgive my ignorance on this, but once a river is dead, is there can it be gradually resurrected? Can it be
Yeah,
cleaned and
yes, it
restored?
can. And that happens to the Yamuna, but you need, for that to happen naturally, you have to have enough water flow in the river itself that it performs its own self-cleaning operation. And that's the problem with the Yamuna. It's been so often dammed or subject to barrages so that its water is sent in various directions so that it can be used in industry and in agriculture, that there's not much water flow left in the Yamuna itself in most seasons of the year. When the monsoon comes, everything changes, and it's like a different river. But then month by month, it becomes weaker or
I see, because of
Yeah.
diversion of its
That's
flow.
right. Yeah, and just in general, because you don't have a stable water supply at the top. Because of the monsoon, you don't have regular rains in North India. They happen on a concentrated basis rather. So the river is vulnerable to being highly polluted outside of the monsoon season.
I see.
A river can be rejuvenated. Yes, it can. There's a tributary to the Yamuna called the Sambal, which joins the river south of Agra and provides quite clean water. So it really, by the time the Yamuna meets the Ganga, the Ganges, at Allahabad, and went downstream to the delta of the Ganges, which is in Bengal, either on the Bangladesh or on the Indian side of the border. By the time that happens, the river, it's better than it was between Delhi and Vrindavan. It's still got lots and lots of problems, but the segment between Delhi and Vrindavan is absolutely the worst of it. And we've been talking about industrial pollution, but it's also human pollution of all kinds, including lots of human sewage.
I see.
Welcome to Vrindavan.
And the water is in Delhi first before you said down. Vrindavan is down.
Delhi's upstream.
I see.
North.
And the river flowing into it near Agra is named
called the Chambal. But that's quite a ways downstream.
I see.
All the way down to Agra. So you go to the Taj Mahal. Good for you. See that remarkable building, which is built on the shores of the Yamuna. If you were to venture behind the Taj, you find yourself in the presence of, most seasons of the year, rather a shallow river, and a deeply polluted one still.
I see. Now the other, I became
just by the if I can say, we're talking about India, and our conversation in the United States. We're responsible in direct and indirect ways for a lot of what has happened in India. I mean, mention of the automobile, it happened right here. The automobile, which became publicly available for lots of people in India in the 1980s, 90s, because of the production of the Maruti, a much cheaper vehicle than others. Is a major polluter in the air for Delhi. So, the question is what burden of guilt does the United States play in history first of all, for the invention of this machine, which has been a very good thing for very many people. We're able to use it here without its, deeply affecting our air quality, though, as we know, Los Angeles was under a cloud of smog for many years, but we don't feel it to the extent that it's felt in much more densely populated parts of the world like India. So we're thinking, what are our obligations to India on this score? And you could ask, does it have a religious dimension?
That's a challenging question indeed. I mean, the idea that an invention happens in a particular country then adds a moral kind of weight related to.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's not so much the invention as the fact that among the larger countries of the world, ours is the one. Once you move outside the Northeast corridor where both of us live, the country is constructed around the automobile. There could be no United States these days if there were not the automobile, and we are major releasers of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere on that account. So I'm just saying the most, I think, obvious and well-known thing, that the proportion of global warming gases that emerge from the United States in relation to the size of the population is just a massive figure. Nowhere near that in India. But everyone wants to have a car, wants to, and so forth. So there it is.
Yeah. Well, it's a challenge. I mean, do Indian cars, India moves forward in terms of its technological advances, including in the efforts for its automobiles to pollute less as we do. Is that the case, Professor? Or
some vehicles, I would say India has done better than we have, actually. They've made an effort to not so much with automobiles, but with other users of petrol or gas to make a change. There's a big moment in Delhi, back actually in the 80s, where a number of vehicles, including buses and three-wheelers, were required to use as fuel natural gas rather than petrol, and that had an immediate effect on the quality of air in Delhi. It became much, much better. But that's not true for private cars. And as their number increased, it didn't take long before we were back up to those same bad numbers, and trucks or lorries again are a problem. So
Yeah.
and added to the fact that in this season, in the Diwali season, you have the winds are less strong, so that they don't clean the air in the same way. And you have the burning of the crops, which puts all sorts of particles up there in the atmosphere.
Yeah. 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 It's often despairing when one ponders the progress, the kind of juggernaut of environmental challenges. I became familiar with the notion of rivers as goddesses or gods, because from my other travels in India, up near Srinagar and so forth. And of course, the Ganges is the central river of India. Yes, is that accurate to
The
say?
biggest.
It's the biggest, and is it most revered among them, or not necessarily? I've
Well, it would
always
depend where you are in the country, you know. If you're living in Narmada, then of course it's the Narmada. But there's some that's in Western India, but there's a certain sense that the Narmada is the Ganges actually. So the Ganges is certainly the major point of reference. Yes.
Okay. And does that all, like the Ganges is in Varanasi, isn't it? Also, is
Yes,
that the Ganges? Yeah.
flows through Banaras.
And is that also suffering from the same types of threats and degradation that you described for the Jamuna?
It sure is. It's not as extreme with the Yamuna because the Ganges is actually a bigger and deeper river. But the pollution, and you spoke about Varanasi, well, Banaras is what it's usually called on site. The pollution in Banaras is just awful. And my being there, which is now 45 years or so, it's just, I used to swim in the Ganges in Banaras, upriver from the town still, but I did. I would never think of it today.
Yeah. It's foreboding. Do you? I don't like questions like this myself, but do you genuinely see a path of hope, or do you see things kind of recalcitrant and people are just not taking seriously enough? What is your general sense of the capacity for humans to recognize the need for substantial or serious action as time is kind of ticking so urgently?
Well, let's get back to the States. This is certainly one of the major planks of the Biden administration. I hope I can talk about it that way. There's no hiding from climate change. It's very much on the radar of his administration. And we know what Trump did. He said one of his first actions was to withdraw our country from the Paris Accords. Almost half the nation is still following him. So you tell me, what kind of a chance do we have in that world?
Right. Well, I was speaking specifically about India, because ultimately, to whatever extent the U.S. will have its international burdens of responsibility, every country ultimately will need to rise to meet its unique challenges domestically as well, right? Do you agree with that?
Well, that certainly is true. And the Modi government, to its credit, has picked up on the record of prior governments to publicly, at least, to face into some of the climate issues that face the country. it has not tried to, this is just commonplace knowledge. I think it has not felt that it's right for third world countries like India to bear the burden of climate change when the first major pollutants were actually the richer nations such as our own. The Modi government actually supports the increased production of coal energy in India. That's on the downside of the ledger. On the upside of the ledger, they have instituted it's called Namami Gange, I give honor to the Ganges campaign, which has many parts to it, is supported recently again by the World Bank, and offers the promise of real environmental change in India. But if you look at the record, we were talking about Banaras a moment ago, Varanasi. You look at the record of what's actually happened in the city, it's been much more in the direction of window dressing than in the direction of the hard work of actually cleaning up the river. Hard work. So I don't know how we stand on that. And Brindavan, you mentioned Srivats, that's how we got into this conversation.
Yeah.
He's been trying to, he certainly is a major figure in Brindavan, but he's not the only one. And he would be the first to say that his and his group's efforts to really be serious about unpolluting the Yamuna in Brindavan and doing something about air quality too, but it's river pollution especially that we're thinking about, have been met by resistance from, at some estimate of his, some 95% of the population. So that's a big number to be up against. And why are they against it? Development, more jobs for everybody. And you might add a difficulty in Indian and Hindu culture. How shall I put this? A difficulty around cleanliness issues. It's not that we don't have those problems too, but for centuries, on the part of most Indians, the carrying off of human waste was somebody else's business, not mine.
Yes.
So look at, and Srivats and his group are really trying to meet that challenge. But it's not an easy one.
It's not easy. It's a curious paradox because at the purest level, the sacred kind of extreme care about cleanliness coexists with this kind of carelessness or non-attention that you just described. It's almost paradoxical that people often look at people from different cultures of our own and imagine them less advanced or less developed, and even by maybe how they dress in simpler ways. And yet oftentimes if you look at the spiritual roots, you'll find an attentiveness or clarity about cleanliness that is far in excess of what your average Western person ever thinks about.
I agree with that. So then the question is, you use the word paradox, and fair enough. But I'm not sure that it seems to be a paradox to Indians. So, the issue is maintaining purity where one can and where it really matters. But that leaves aside whole domains of life that that often no one has taken public responsibility for.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Our record is clear either, but it certainly isn't, in fact. But
well, it's interesting. I wanted to move to this for a second. That when one thinks of pollution, or especially maybe water, also water and air pollution, there's two versions of it. There's the ultra modern version where development itself creates this kind of big kind of shiny steel monster of polluting force of just industry and chemicals roaring into rivers and things. And then on the other side of it, there's the kind of the version of just very primitive waste management, just human, human waste, polluting the rivers, or I don't know if all the public or ritualistic use of the Ganges is also a significant polluting force. Is it also just the ritualistic dimensions of like uh, the disposal of funeral ashes and so on and so forth? All of these types of things, which are somehow seen as the opposite of development, or even I can't find the right or correct something like primitive behavior
So we're
or
talking about Benares. So there have been some studies on this. In Benares, as elsewhere along the Yamuna and the Ganga, often the image of a deity will be at the end of a festival cycle. The image of a deity, what do you do with the image? Well, one immerses that image in, let's say, the Ganges. That wouldn't have been so bad a while ago because the paints that would have been used to give life and color to that image would not have had a chemical basis. They would have been natural paints.
mm,
But now the cheaper and more sort of vivid colors come from chemistry-based.
right.
So all of that gets put into the Ganges. How significant is it in relation to other pollutants? I think, relatively minor, but important in a place like Benares.
Mm.
So
So they're kind of twin. It's kind of lack of development yields a certain type of pollution, and excess development or development itself yields a certain type of pollution. Correct?
but you know what yes, but the underlying problem that we're not talking about, and it's a very difficult one, is population.
Yes. Yes.
In my lifetime, the population of India has more than doubled. And so that's a lot of people.
Yes.
In the Delhi area, it has quadrupled.
I see.
So, just imagine all of that construction, search for water for that many people has
Mm,
put the subterranean water level way, way down.
mm,
And all of the other effects of having so many people in that urban conglomerate, just in terms of waste management of all kinds, is just enormous.
yes.
So when you ask about, what is it to actually look that in the face, it's hard to know what to say. In India, it's been ever since. Well, let's do a little history. Back in the reign of Indira Gandhi and the Congress Party, there was an effort in the mid-70s.
Yeah.
An emergency was declared. So lots and lots of she said she was doing it so as to be able to make progress in the fight against poverty. I'm not sure we need to doubt that altogether. But one of the means for doing that was to try to cut down the population to a level so that it was not reproducing itself in numbers that vastly exceeded present numbers. So the great slogan was, we are two and we have two. No children in a family.
Mm,
There were various experiments in actually population control that went down very badly with the populace as a whole. So no one dares talk about population as a problem in India today. You just don't hear anything about it.
I see.
So, we've got our own issues with abortion over here, but it's not at all a problem on the same scale as it is in India.
I see.
It's just a huge black box that no one is daring to venture in at all. It would be a very hard sell, let us say, to to introduce population control in the way that happened in the People's Republic of China, for all the reasons that we know very well, and not wanting to be a part of an authoritarian state.
Right.
Able to come to a social compact that would mean that would override the desires of individual mothers and fathers.
Yes.
But that's what we're talking about.
Now, sorry to be a little bit off track from just in general conversation, but isn't it the case that people imagine that the growth of a middle class or prosperity or that naturally brings population down? So when you're poor on a farm, you're going to have 11 kids just because you need them, just to survive, curiously enough, oddly enough. And then when one moves up into middle classes and you're having your children and you're thinking, to get into college these days is going to start saving yesterday, people naturally control the growth of their family as it's basically the rise of middle class, I think.
It's absolutely true that we have just the same thing in India, and numbers of people who are in the, broadly middle class, how you would define that may be a question, but exhibit exactly the pattern that you're talking about.
Right.
If that were to continue at present levels, we might have a stabilization of the population in something like 2060.
Okay.
Got to there, we would, the population of India, let's say, would already be more than twice what it is now.
Yeah, right. I understand. Well,
but that's probably what's going to, that's probably the future we're looking at. But just imagine what the consequences of that are for our children.
Yes. Yeah. Well, this has been certainly a very sober section of the conversation for sure, and rightfully should be, especially with your knowledge specifically in these areas. If we're not going to be hearing about it clearly now, maybe we would never have otherwise. I don't want to be irresponsible and just jump around, but there's a related, I don't know if it's related, but there's another topic I was keen on asking you about, because I seem to catch it in your writing and thinking. It's one of the first lines in your syllabus in which you says one of the questions is whether religion brings resources, both in concept and in practice, to meet these crisis proportion challenges. And again, this is something similar in terms of moderns often look at religion as somewhat backward or superstitious, or I myself don't. I think it's one of the most helpful things for giving hope, even in the face of these crises. That's my bias. But I'm wondering before we go too long to hear your thoughts or on this question. I'm very interested in this question. Shall I repeat
Amitav
it?
Ghosh, has written this searing book called The Great Derangement, and he is no optimist about where we stand as a species right now. But as you come to the very last pages of that book, he wants to recognize and appreciate the contributions that are already being made by some religious groups to try to look this problem in the face. And he has Pope Francis in mind, for example. For sure, we need all the resources we can get. And since one of the things that religion is about, maybe it is the thing that religion is about, is the relationship between human beings and the ground of their being, you would hope that religion would provide some resources for people like myself to stop look and try to think um, what demands our own religious traditions place on us in this regard. So I've thought about, as Srivats has, sort of after Srivats, I've thought about Vrindavan a lot in this regard. And I would hold up some of his efforts as examples of how we might proceed. The amazing thing about Vrindavan, it's there in the name itself, is that it was created. It was all, it's for 2,000 years at least, it's been an idea in the mind of the Indian people. But it was a kind of Edenic idea, an ideal idea that didn't necessarily have a place on a map. In the 16th century, and Vrindavan represented that, a sense of an ideal space in which human beings, rivers, mountains, and animals got along in a beautiful way.
Yeah.
And there are many parts to it. So to see Vrindavan, this ideal place, as it was then established as a physical place of pilgrimage on the shores of the Yamuna in the 16th century, see what it's up against in the 21st century is just shocking. One small thing that I thought, and following Srivats and others, could be done for Vrindavan is to make it a World Heritage Site, so that, under the auspices of UNESCO, so that there would be some kind of rubric that would protect Vrindavan against against its less good self,
Mm, yeah.
and industrialization, overpopulation, and simply protect the river. But it's a symbolic gesture, largely speaking. Yes, it would require ultimately the cleaning up of the river, so it would extend beyond Vrindavan. But then in Vrindavan, one could see what the stakes are, because this is the image for so many Indians of how the world ought to be if the world were as it should be. The paradise of Krishna. Well, that, but
so kind of its sacredness in the mind of India and Indians, if it could start to make some genuine progress in terms of ecological improvement and restoration, its very function as a place of ideal could somehow be exported into the minds of, let's do this everywhere. This is what we can be. It's a little bit like the constant dream of peace in Jerusalem, where
yes,
the three great, right? It's something like that. It's where, isn't it? It's like that river and the playground.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my gosh, think about Jerusalem.
So one is the clash of religions, and the other one is the integration of humanity and the sacred earth that supports us. It's relational in both ways, and kind of could be in a certain way a crown jewel of that relationship if there are signs of progress. It's a symbol of what we might in fact can be. It's because it's one of the hardest places in both accounts.
I think you've said that very well. Here we have, religion, and want to look at a place where conflict is really, it seems just intractable. Look at Jerusalem.
Right.
Want to look at a place where the challenges of the environment seem insuperable. Look at Vrindavan.
There you go. So interesting, right? And
So
these
for
are,
Vrindavan,
yes,
you know, it wouldn't just be a sort of matter of a city on the hill, an example, but Vrindavan itself is being eaten up by the megalopolis that is Delhi. People now go down to Vrindavan on weekends, become a weekend city. Okay,
yeah.
fine.
Mm.
But it's more than that in people's appreciation of what Vrindavan is. Today, I guarantee you, Vrindavan is flooded with people from elsewhere in the greater Delhi region coming to, to be in Vrindavan for Diwali or for Govardhan Puja, as it's called in the Braj country itself. The place is flooded. So it's not as if the sort of the old hymn, "Pray for the Peace of Jerusalem," to me, it's not as if one's praying for the peace of Vrindavan at a distance. No, people are going there. So if Vrindavan, if the people who really care about Vrindavan could accept the seriousness of the situation and see themselves as, real actors on the stage of human history, it might really make quite a difference. But it's going to require acts of sacrifice from all of us.
Yeah.
That's very, it's hard to face into.
Yeah, yeah. You have a natural kind of, what's that thing that you used to look at when you were little and you turn it and all the things,
Kaleidoscope.
kaleidoscope. You have a kind of a kaleidoscopic
Not
view.
everybody's childhood was like that, but when you, yes, we had a kaleidoscope.
And so, because I remember reading a sentence or two when you were just saying, I wish I could memorize it. It's something like the natural cycles of the seasons are lost there, and the weekend has replaced the seasonal reality.
That's true.
Yeah, and then you talked about one day holidays and the like. Do you remember this part of Krishna's playground? Maybe not, but so just this whole idea of not only the earth getting polluted by human misbehavior, but also the realm of the sacred also getting polluted by human misbehavior. So you talk about these big Disneyland type ashrams springing up everywhere in Vrindavan, and so even the religion's leaders themselves are almost equally responsible for attracting or drawing this kind of misapplication of.
I wouldn't, you don't want to judge that one myself in quite those terms. We have a couple of things going on here. One is the collapse of the natural seasons as feeders for pilgrims to Vrindavan in various seasons, which used to be very notable. You'd see people from the east of India coming in one season and people from the Punjab in others. It made sense in terms of their agricultural cycles and so forth. So part of the sort of the natural rhythms of the earth, with people coming to Vrindavan from various locales. And then the other element that you just mentioned is very, is startlingly clear in Vrindavan. Once again, it's a kind of example of what's happening in our world, or different ways of relating to being human and religious at the same time. So ISKCON, that's to say the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, in
Yes.
Bangalore setting, that's a part of ISKCON that has broken away from international ISKCON so as to be a self-governing native ISKCON, emerging from and representing really the IT economy of Bangalore. So ISKCON Bangalore has this project at the periphery of Vrindavan to build there a 70-story tower. 70 stories in a town that until yesterday really had no buildings that were taller than
1.5.
Yeah, or maybe 4 stories, something like that at most. Things have changed. 70. So why would they do that? Because they want Krishna and the worship of Krishna to be a part of our times. They don't want the temples that represent him to be just forgotten among the skyscrapers, the great monuments of our time. So the purpose is to build a skyscraper monument that will be attractive and will be different from others and will pull people into Krishna consciousness.
Okay.
Part of it is a sort of theme park atmosphere that they'll be building too. But the question then is whether assimilating, let's call it religion, to the conditions of modern life really is the way to go. You and I are sitting in New York. There was a period in the history of New York where a set of buildings called skyscraper churches were built. So the old churches suddenly found themselves in the shadows of the skyscrapers that represented the way New York was going to be. So one tried to sort of catch up with it. My office looks out at one. It's the tower of the Riverside Church, which had
I didn't know
John
that.
D. Rockefeller.
Beautiful.
So, there was an effort to build a skyscraper that would be taller than any other, building in New York. It had the advantage of being on Morningside Heights. It would sort of be a beacon to the skyscraper world. So one can understand how the Bangalore ISKCON people want to be that kind of voice in the otherwise, let's say, godless or dangerously godless world that we now live in. But in Vrindavan, by giving in to that urge to build, a Tower of Babel, let's call it, or a ziggurat that's as tall as everybody else's, the big question is whether that doesn't not just diminish, but cancel the sense of Eden-like pristineness that was needed for Vrindavan in the first place. So once again, Vrindavan serves as this dramatic place of conflict between the world that surrounds it and the world that, in its concept, it was intended to represent.
Fascinating. That's positively fascinating.
I've got, we should close up pretty quick.
Yeah. Very good. Well, let's leave it at that. I was questioning whether or not to touch on one other point, but I see that it's kind of an iceberg, what I had in mind. And I think you've really done a perfect job in bringing this giant project in front of us, which leaves the whole rest of the questions for us to ponder. Maybe
I like the image of an iceberg. It's exactly the kind of thing we don't want to melt. Really, we have a few icebergs left in the world. It would not be a bad thing. And don't buy any of them.
Maybe we'll be able to hear from you again sometime, but this has been a real blessing and a real education.
Well, thanks very much. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Much for being
and we have the secret from our hearers of the fact that we actually engineered this via Zoom, so we actually know each what the other looks like.
There you go. That's a great start.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Professor.
And a happy Diwali to you. Shubh Diwali.
Thank you. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.